Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday night's UFC 174 event, which takes place in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 6 bouts in total. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 42 went 1-2 to lose 1.375 units in total. We lost a play on Jake Lindsay for 1.5 units, and a bet for 2.5 units on Eric Perez, but we did pick up a 2.5 unit pick on underdog Lance Benoist. I'll also have to mention that our free bet, a 1 unit play on Jason High, also failed to deliver. Back to the present, UFC 174 features an 11 fight card in total and will be aired on Fight Pass and of course on pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the Fight Pass prelims, we have a lightweight contest between a pair of UFC newcomers in Jason Sago, who is 9-1, taking on Josh Shockley, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Sago opens minus 160, Shockley opens plus 120. So Sago the very slight favorite, and since that time, actually looking over 5 Dimes right now. Sago is minus 130, the comeback on Shockley plus 110. So 10-cent drop on the dog. A little bit more action coming in on Shockley, but the books are reporting 2-way action overall. So this should be pretty even on this fight, and a lot of split opinions, I should say, on this fight as well. Basically what you got here is two extremely talented grapplers. I mean, I should say talented by, the level of competition that they face, really not that great overall. But I should say Shockley does have a couple of decent wins. He's got wins over, UFC veterans, Michael Miller and Shamar Bailey. So solid, with those. And he's been also in Bellator as well. But I believe he went 2-2 if I'm not mistaken in Bellator. So, surprising to see UFC kind of pick Shockley up. But that being said, I think they made a smart decision. Well, I'll start off with Shockley first, since I'm kind of going that way here with him too. Shockley is a very talented fighter as far as the ground goes. I mean, he looks to take the fight to the floor often. I mean, that's basically his style. He's more of a grinder than anything else. He is a tall, lanky fighter. He's aggressive. He's strong for the weight class. And on the feet, he's nothing really special, but does have some power and some reach advantages, of course, in the division he'll have over a lot of people. Prefers to grapple and uses wrestling again, like I said. He does have decent takedowns though, and has a pretty solid top game. Lands some ground and pound, gets positional control. Not a bad, sufficient game offensively. Now the concern with Shockley, of course, is his subdy. I mean, he has lost a couple fights by submission, by armbar. So he does kind of tend to make mistakes sometimes against very good grapplers, and that cost him. Now Sago is exactly just that. He is a very talented submission fighter himself. He's a brown belt, if I'm not mistaken, in BJJ. He's got a decent ground attack overall. He does definitely attack aggressively with subs. On the feet, he's nothing special really either. He might have a slight advantage overall over Shockley. He does prefer to kick a lot. I mean, he throws some solid kicks, but that could also lead to takedowns. I think Shockley might be able to snag one of those kicks and put him on his back. So to me, this is an interesting battle here. It's basically if Sago can submit Shockley or not. Sago primarily uses his striking to close the distance and set up his takedowns. That's kind of what he wants to do. He is pretty smooth on the ground. He transitions well. And he's dangerous kind of from top or bottom, but I'm going to slightly lean towards Shockley because I think he's going to spend more time in top position in this fight. Now, I do think the transitions and the grappling exchanges will go back and forth, and Sago has some pretty solid wrestling in his own right. But I do think that Shockley's just a little bit bigger, physically stronger, and I think he's going to end up in top position more so than not. So I think he's going to be able to grind out a close competitive decision over Sago. And this is, again, two very talented grapplers that have been out for about a year. So we should mention that as well. But I'm glad they're getting their shot. Sago is going to be the hometown guy. So you got to take that in consideration. If it does hit the cards, you might get a little bit of favoritism, but I think Shockley's still probably going to grind him out enough to get the nod here. So my pick is going to be Shockley.
And I'm going to slightly disagree. I mean, neither of these guys are like standing out incredibly. Both have losses against decent competition, although Shockley does have the better wins overall. And Shockley actually is a little bit bigger physically than Sago, but I do think that when it comes down to it, Sago actually does have a slightly better ground game, at least in terms of submissions, and that's where Shockley has had some trouble. Now, if Shockley gets on top, he's actually pretty smothering. I mean, he did a good job of holding down Shamar Bailey, who's a pretty talented wrestler, and he stifled Micah Miller in their fight, took him down repeatedly without getting submitted. So he's definitely getting better. Now, a problem for both guys is neither of them have fought in a significant amount of time. I don't think Shockley's fought in about a year, and Sago's about 11 months, so they're both going to be equally rusty, although Sago is fighting closer to home since he is a native Canadian. Now, on the feet, I think Shockley does have a slight reach advantage, but he's not much of a striker. He doesn't have a lot of power unless he's on top dropping ground and pound. And I think Sago is a little bit more diverse on the feet. He'll throw more kicks from distance. He mixes it up a little bit better. And he uses his strikes to set up the ground game. He has some pretty good explosion with his takedowns, although he has to be careful because if Shockley gets on top, he could be in some trouble. So I think Sago can pull this out. Not terribly confident just because, we need to see a little bit more of these guys in the UFC before we can know for sure, but I'm going to go Sago. I think he draws on that home crowd enthusiasm, and I think he can pull it out here. So I'm going to pick Jason Sago. Now moving on, we have a bantamweight contest with Roland Delorme, who is 9-2 overall with 1 no contest, taking on Michinori Tanaka, who is 9-0. Now Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, this fight opened also near pick'em. Delorme minus 140, Tanaka even money. That was my opening line. Since that time, Tanaka's been getting the love and respect out there from the bettors. I mean, Tanaka's coming in right now at minus 125 to come back on Delorme plus 105. So line flipped. And a lot of people believe that Tanaka is just stylistically a bad matchup for Delorme, and that could be. I mean, Tanaka is a very solid young prospect. He's very dangerous on the ground. He's a judo black belt. He's a former PXC bantamweight champion, so he's got some gold around his waist from the smaller organizations, of course. But what you get from Tanaka, really, he's a short, compact, little powerful spark plug, man. I mean, he's fun to watch for sure fight. He's well-rounded. He prefers to grapple, though, of course. On the feet, he's got decent speed, good hands. He counters well. Defensively, there is a little bit of problem, though, because he keeps his hands a little bit too low. I mean, he's one of these guys that almost has that little karate style going with his hands around his waist a little bit more often than you would like to see. But grappling, again, that's what he does best, and he's really fun to watch. He could put he can be put on his back, I should say that. I mean, he could put most people on their backs as well, but he can be put on his back. So that worries me a little bit as well. I mean, his takedown defense needs to keep on improving. He gets himself in some very tough spots, but most time he ends up managing to get out of those tough spots and make it work for him. I mean, he ends up scrambling out well and getting top position and making life usually tough for his opponents. But we'll get right into Delorme. I mean, most of us know what we get with Delorme. He's a very solid, underrated bantamweight. He's an outstanding grappler in his own right. He's got decent wrestling, a great submission game as far as offensively goes, and his defense is pretty solid as well. Delorme's going to have some physical advantages in this fight as far as size. He's going to have a decent reach advantage, and I think he's going to be a little bit stronger than Tanaka. Even though Tanaka is a very powerful guy in his own right, I think Delorme is still going to have that size advantage over him. It could come in handy here. His stand-up, of course, we all know it's not a serious threat, but he is consistently improving. He showed a little bit of at least stunning or KO power in his recent fights a little bit. He's been rocking people, so that's good to see from Delorme. But again, he's the kind of guy that really looks to take things to the floor and dominate the ground. So this is going to be a grappling battle, I think, back and forth, and we're going to see some competitive scrambles and some good jiu-jitsu displayed here. I'm going to slightly lean towards Delorme because I think he has potential to actually take Tanaka's back. If you look at the footage with Tanaka, again, I mentioned that he gets in some tough spots. Guys have been successful and are able to take his back throughout the fight. And with a guy like Delorme, I mean, he has to definitely survive and not put himself in that kind of spot because Delorme's a finisher, and he can definitely finish the fight if he does get the opportunity like that. So that's kind of why I'm leaning to Delorme, because Tanaka does put himself in those bad spots, and I think Delorme could probably find a way to finish him. Now, that being said, if Delorme doesn't find that finish, I think you almost got to favor Tanaka by decision a little bit too. So I'm a little split on this fight because I think Tanaka's going to be fun enough, and I think the judges are going to like what they see. So even though it is in Canada and Delorme's Canadian, I think the judges might be swayed a little bit more by Tanaka. But overall, I'm still going to pick Delorme because I think he is going to have the physical advantages in this fight, and he is a grappler, and it's basically a grappler versus grappler type of fight. So I think he's going to be the stronger and the more capable finisher. So I'm going to pick Delorme with a slight lean here.
And I'm going to disagree on this one. I really like Tanaka. A lot of people are hyping him up as one of the better prospects, probably one of the best prospects out of Japan that wasn't signed by the UFC yet. And the guy's got some serious talent. One of the things that really helped him overall being a champion overseas was he got some experience in 5-round fights, so we know his conditioning is rock solid. That's not going to be a problem whatsoever against Delorme, and that's a problem for Delorme because one of his biggest advantages in the bantamweight division is wearing guys down, and when they get tired, that's when he, takes advantage, gets on top, and when he is on their back, he can get a rear naked choke. So I think if he can't do that, then Tanaka has him beat in just about every other area, especially on the feet. If Tanaka wants, he can just keep this fight standing, and then he should be able to outmaneuver Delorme, who's definitely a stiff stand-up fighter, although he does have a little bit of power. And Tanaka should be able to just dance around him and land some good strikes, whether it's kicks, knees, punches, and then stay out of takedown range. If the fight does go to the canvas, I think Tanaka is good enough to out-grapple Delorme, potentially. But the thing that scares me, as Nick mentioned, is he takes big risks, he's wild, and one of his biggest problems is he gets himself in bad positions. And you really can't do that against Delorme, because if he gives up his back trying to get back to his feet, then Delorme's gonna sink in both hooks and then work for a choke. So Tanaka can't afford to do that. I mean, he's been in such bad positions that he actually had to get saved by the bell at some points in his earlier career. As long as he avoids those bad spots, then I think Tanaka should win. The only other concern is size, because I think Tanaka probably should be able to make flyweight if he really wanted to. But I think Tanaka is still going to be able to win, just like Kyoji Horiguchi, who won in his bantamweight debut in the UFC and then dropped down. I think this is another opportunity here where Tanaka's going to win at bantamweight and then drop down to flyweight and be a big threat there. He's still only 23, 24 years old, so this kid's loaded with potential. So my pick is Tanaka. Now moving on to the FX portion of the prelims, we have a lightweight contest. We have Kajan Johnson, who is 19-10-1, taking on Tai-Hyun Bang, who is 16-8 overall. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Johnson minus 170, Bang plus 130. That was my opener. And right now it's Johnson minus 165. Comeback on Bang is plus 145. So line holding steady, two-way action back and forth on this fight here. So not really that much of a surprise, because Bang is getting some respect with his knockout power and his just strength on the feet overall. That's what you get out of Bang. I mean, he's a southpaw. He's a heavy hitter. He stalks. He pushes forward. He's got good boxing, and he just throws hard, heavy punches. He's got good timing with him as well, so his accuracy is not too bad. But the thing is, with him, he doesn't have much ground game, and his takedown defense is questionable at times. But overall, in most cases, he's able to stifle the takedowns of his opponents. Now, Johnson, though, on the other hand, is a little bit underrated in several areas. I mean, actually, he's a very well-rounded veteran himself. He's got some solid striking. I'm impressed with his footwork, his speed. He's got a little bit of power, and he mixes everything up well. So that's what you like to see in a fighter. I mean, Johnson, his boxing, his kicks, his counters, his angles, he actually looks pretty good on the feet. But, I mean, he has been clipped and KO'd in the past. I mean, he's coming off that devastating KO where he actually broke his jaw in the Ultimate Fighter. Laprise got him, and man, that was pretty nasty. I mean, I'm sure most of you guys have checked that out already. So that is a concern here. I mean, rebounding from a broken jaw and fighting somebody that can definitely put your lights out is a head scratcher, really. So he's got to be very cautious here. But that being said, still, I think Johnson overall, he's underrated. I mean, he's got decent wrestling, and his grappling game could probably pay some dividends here if he's able to get the fight to the floor. So I think Johnson has more ways to win this fight. He can outpoint Bang, even on the feet, even though Bang is the more, I would say the more dangerous striker and more capable of finishing the fight on the feet. I still think Johnson could probably land more frequently on Bang. And then if he does get the takedowns, he's got a better submission game. He's got a better overall ground game. And again, the fight in it is kind of in his backyard. He's Canadian, so training with TriStar and the crew there. So Johnson has more advantages in this fight. So I am going to pick Johnson. Got to be cautious though, because again, he did get his jaw broken, and Bang does hit like a truck. So my pick is Johnson.
And I'm in complete agreement this time. Honestly, I just don't think Taehyung Bang is that good of a fighter. He's pretty much a one-trick pony with big power, and if he doesn't connect, then he's going to lose. He does not throw actively enough for the judges to get swayed even if he's not scoring the knockout. So I don't think Bang can possibly win a decision. The only way Bang can win is if he knocks Cajun Johnson out. And it's possible. I mean, Johnson has been knocked out a few times in his career, especially that most recent Ultimate Fighter, one of the nastiest ones in Ultimate Fighter history. But Johnson is well-rounded enough that he should be able to get this fight to the ground if he wants. I mean, Bang was taken down 5 times in his UFC debut. He did not look good at all. He's just not an active fighter, and Johnson should be able to take advantage of that. Johnson should have a slight reach advantage. He's going to be the bigger overall fighter. He should be more athletic, and I think he's more experienced. So overall, this is definitely Cajun Johnson's fight to lose. And if he can get this fight to the canvas, he might even be able to get a stoppage victory due to submission. But he should at least be able to win a decision as long as he uses his wrestling here and avoids that one-trick pony kind of knockout blow.
Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have a very interesting battle between Yves Javouet, who is 19-9 overall, taking on Mike Hulk Easton, who is 13-4. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Easton minus 190, and for me, those of you guys that listen to the Oddscast, you know why I'm just going to pronounce his first name, but Yves came in at plus 150, and right now looking over at the line at 5 dimes. Easton's minus 185, plus 160 on Yves as a dog. So just line got a little bit tighter. There's been some two-way action at the sportsbooks in general. So I think it's a fair spot to open it. I mean, Easton should have some advantages in this fight. Obviously, he's got the grappling advantage, but it's going to be hard to take Yves down. I mean, Yves' takedown defense is very solid, and usually, in most cases, he ends up keeping the fight on the feet. Offensively, actually, Yves has some underrated wrestling in his own right. So this is going to be a competitive fight back and forth. I mean, Easton tends to be a little bit slow at times and not strike enough. I mean, he needs to get a little bit busier and more consistent with his strikes and pushing forward a little bit more consistently as well. He tends to kind of get slow and just not do enough work sometimes. Yves tends to backpedal a little bit as well, use angles on the feet and look for spots. Now, of course, we got to point out that, I mean, Yves' chin has been tested and he's been knocked out recently a couple times, which is a big question mark and a big concern. I mean, I think really if his chin holds up, it's going to be such a competitive fight because Easton's not going to have a lot of success getting this fight to the ground, and Yves is the better overall striker on the feet. I think that Yves is probably going to win a decision here, but again, it's one of those spots that, I mean, he's been through some hard competition recently, and so has Easton, of course, but Easton's chin has held up a little bit better. He's a little bit younger, but that's the concern with Yves at this point is just that chin. But overall, I think it's going to be a competitive, back and forth type of fight. I'm going to pick Easton. It's definitely a pick'em fight, and I think there could be, some value on Yves as an underdog as far as pure betting goes. But back and forth, I mean, these guys should go, and I think you got to favor Easton slightly because of some of the ability that he's had. And again, he's been tested recently himself. And I actually think even though Easton's been losing some fights recently, I see some improvement in his game, and he is starting to get a little bit more aggressive.
I'm going to go the side of Easton. Honestly, one of the biggest metrics that stands out for me is the age gap. Javouet is 35 years old and Easton's still 30. And you look at the way they fought recently, and Javouet looks 35 when he's competing. That's a problem for me. And as we all know, as you get a little older, you get a little more susceptible to the knockouts. All the damage that you've accumulated through your career starts to add up. And Javouet has been knocked out twice in his last 3 fights. And honestly, he probably should be on a 3-fight losing streak. I thought he lost to Dustin Pegg in that sandwich bout in between the fights against Brad Pickett and Eddie Wineland. Now, losing to Pickett and Wineland is, there's nothing wrong with that. Both of those guys are top-tier fighters. but I do think that Jabway is on a decline. Overall, Jabway is a slightly better striker than Easton. You know, he mixes it up pretty well. He can throw all kinds of spinning attacks. He can throw kicks pretty well. Easton is a little more straightforward. Doesn't throw a lot of kicks, although he does have some powerful leg kicks when he does throw them. And he throws big punches, although they're not very accurate. And he doesn't have a very long reach, so Easton isn't very good at connecting with them. But I think the biggest difference here is maybe the change in Mike Easton. You know, he had a problem before of being inactive and, you know, basically just moving forward and putting pressure on opponents. And he's starting to throw a little more. He's having more exciting fights. He's won a fight of the night. So I think, you know, his performance against Brad Pickett was a lot more entertaining than Jabway's, where Jabway just got, you know, obliterated. So I think that Easton, while he has lost 3 in a row, he's on the right path, because those all 3 opponents are rock solid. I mean, TJ Dillashaw is the champion now, and that's his most recent fight, even if he did take a beating in that fight. And Easton's chin holds up. I think Easton has a terrific chin. He can take a shot, and if he gets in a situation against Jabway where they're trading punch for punch, it's Jabway that's going to get himself in trouble. On the ground, while Jabway does have pretty good takedown defense, once he is on the ground, he does have problems. He is not very good in terms of submission defense. He's not very good off of his back at all. So if Easton can get on top, he could definitely submit him. He could definitely ground and pound him like Mark Hominick did back in the WEC. It's completely plausible. So I'm going to pick Mike Easton. I just think he's got a little more gas left in the tank. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they do say it's a tricky fight, and actually it was weird when I set up the Uber tail of the tape for this matchup. One guy has all the advantages on the tail of the tape, the traditional tail of the tape, that is, you know, size, youth, stance, things like that. And the other fighter, Eve, actually has almost a clean sweep all the way down the line in terms of performance metrics. So you could argue that Eve is a little bit more of the technical fighter. He's the more skilled fighter, precise, efficient, effective, all of those things. Whereas Mike Easton is a bit more of a powerhouse, and he's been coming through. He's obviously had some very tough matchups, but he has looked okay against really top level competition. And so as the younger, longer southpaw, when you look at the tail of the tape, you might immediately leap to his side of the equation here. So for me, it's too tricky to make a bet. My slight lean is towards Easton. I think he's more likely to use the wrestling to his advantage and grind this out. Either way, the only real finishing potential, obviously you gotta be careful about Eves' chin. It has been exposed lately. He is 35. He's almost the oldest fighter on the card. So that is a risk for him, but I think probably this goes to distance, and I think that Easton should be able to grind this out.
Now, sticking with the bantamweight division, this time with the ladies, we have a pair of newcomers in Valerie Letourneau, who is 5-3 overall, taking on Elizabeth Phillips, who is 4-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Letourneau minus 190, the comeback on Phillips plus 150. Now, we have seen some movement in this line. I mean, Phillips, at 5 dimes actually, Phillips is now the favorite. So it's minus 115, the comeback on Letourneau minus 105. But across the board, looking at the Don Best screen, Letourneau is the favorite, minus 115, $120, in most places. So basically a pick'em type of fight. Man, this is a head scratcher really, because Phillips is taking this fight with less than 2 weeks notice. And she's more of a natural 135er. Letourneau actually should be fighting at 125. Now, of course, Letourneau, most of you guys might know her. She lost to Roxanne Modafferi on the opening round of Tough 18 by submission rear naked choke. She trains at TriStar, so she's coming in fighting out of a great camp, and this is obviously going to be in her backyard as well. And all of her losses have been a very solid competition. I mean, if you look at her resume, she's lost to nothing but studs, but her wins actually, if you look a little bit closer, are not that impressive because she doesn't have any marquee wins on her resume. So she's lost to fighters that she should lose to, and she's beat the fighters that she should beat. So this is an interesting factor here because, I mean, again, she should be fighting at 125, and she's basically, it's a striker versus grappler matchup here is what we're getting. I mean, Letourneau prefers to stand up and strike. She's got a decent kickboxing game overall. If you look back at her footage, I mean, she even had Sarah Kaufman in some trouble in her fight with her. She knocked her down with a head kick. So that's pretty impressive, actually. I know it was early on in their careers, but still. skill. So she has some capabilities definitely on the feet, has some decent ground skill, but I mean, if you look back again at that Roxanne Modafferi fight, it was kind of scary how easy Roxy took her down and submitted her. So there are some question marks with Letourneau for sure on the ground. Now Phillips, on the other hand, there's not a ton of information or a lot out there on her, a lot of footage out there either. You look back, I believe it's an amateur fight that's out there on YouTube or whatnot, and she looked terrible in that fight. But then if you look at her most recent performance, she looked a lot better, and you could see what she's the improvements in her overall game, and you can see that she's capable of definitely grinding out some opponents, and that's what she's best at. I think her stand-up game, she's not very impressive, Phillips, on the feet, but she does have some power, and she isn't constantly improving that stand-up game as well. She trains out of a good camp with the likes of Michael Chiesa, Cecilia, and actually the Ultimate Fighter winner Pena. So she comes out, with a decent training camp, and she should be very well-rounded. She's aggressive on the feet. She's got a decent lead jab and has some power in her hands as well. But again, I'm not as impressed with her footwork or her stand-up skill as much as I am impressed with her ground game. And I think that's what she's going to look. She's going to look to bully Letourneau here in this fight because she is physically a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. And she does have a ground advantage in this fight. I think she can get some takedowns. Her BJJ skill is decent. It's always improving as well, but she loves to ground and pound and just grind on people. But again, if you look at her resume, she's fought low-level competition, and her W's are against very low-level competition. So you have two girls that are kind of question marks to see if they belong even in the UFC, but they're both getting their opportunities, and I think we're going to probably see a very competitive type of fight. I'm going to lean towards Phillips a little bit because I think she has improved enough, and her physical size is going to be the difference in this fight. And I don't think Letourneau is going to probably knock Phillips out, and that's what I think she's going to need to do to win this fight. So, got to lean with Phillips. I think her wrestling, her ability to dictate the fight is probably going to win it for her.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement. Although this is a tough fight to call, just because while Phillips does have that physicality and definitely a ground advantage, Letourneau has definitely faced some pretty stiff opposition throughout her career. I mean, she's already faced the likes of Sarah Kaufman, Alexis Davis, Roxanne Modafferi, and Claudia Gadelha throughout her career. Her big problem is she's undersized. You know, almost her entire career she's fought at 125 pounds, and if she's fought at 135, it's because she moved up a weight class just to get a fight. And all those fights I mentioned, you know, those big names, she lost every single one of them. That's 4 losses because the other one to Modafferi was while trying out for the Ultimate Fighter, and that was a loss to get into the house. Honestly, Letourneau's ground game is very bad. It's not good. Once she's on her back, she's in big trouble. If Phillips has, you know, any inkling of decent submission ability, which she should have, then she should be able to definitely do work if she gets on top. Now, where this fight has an equalizer is on the feet. Letourneau actually is a really solid kickboxer. She has some decent punching prowess, and she lands some really nasty kicks when she's at distance. So she's definitely capable of landing a big shot on the feet. But what it's going to come down to for me is I just think Phillips is going to be a little bit too much. Now, one concern here for Phillips is she literally just fought less than 2 weeks ago. It'll be a 2-week gap exactly between her most recent fight and this one that she's taking here at UFC 174. And it's not like she won in 30 seconds either. She won a full-on decision. Granted, it was, you know, a solid decision, but still, that's 15 minutes of cage time, 2 weeks before the fight. So you got to think about that a little bit. But that's balanced by Letourneau, who hasn't had a professional fight in over 2 years. So I'm going to stick with the fighter that's at least staying active and is a little bit more physical, because Phillips actually cuts weight to make 135 pounds. So she should be in really good shape here. And as long as she can get this fight to the canvas, I can see Phillips winning a decision. So I'm going to pick Elizabeth Phillips. Now, the final bout of the FX prelims is a welterweight contest between Daniel Sarafian, who is 9-4, taking on Kichi Kunamoto, who is 16-5-2 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Sarafian minus 305, Kunamoto plus 225 was my opening number. Right now over 5 dimes. Sarafian is actually minus 365. The comeback, and Kunamoto is plus 305. So more support coming in on Sarafian, and not very surprised here. I mean, the guy definitely deserves some respect. He is dropping down to 170 for the first time, and he was a short, compact, strong fighter at middleweight. So this move should be pretty good for his career. Sarafian is well-rounded. He's always improving his overall game. On the feet, he's pretty quick. For his size, again, he's decent. He has decent footwork, solid boxing, pretty powerful punches in both hands, really. And of course, he's got solid wrestling and takedown defense. So he's pretty well rounded and always improving his game. He's been in the sport for a while, so I'm glad to see him kind of make these improvements in his game. And again, I think 170 should be a very good fit for him. Now, Kunamoto, on the other hand, again, he's a pretty big welterweight actually for his size. For the division, I should say. He's a submission specialist in his own right. He looks for takedowns very often. His stand-up game, really not much to say about it. I mean, on the feet, his most effective techniques are his low kicks, and he's got a decent right hand to go along with that as well, but he doesn't offer too much on the feet. So Sarafian should have the advantage standing. Now again, Kunamoto, with his size and strength, he does look and is capable of getting the fight to the floor in most cases. But I think he's going to struggle against Sarafian because Sarafian's got pretty solid takedown defense, and Sarafian does manage, if you do get him down, he manages to scramble up pretty good. So Kunamoto, it's just a bad stylistic matchup for him. I mean, the guy is definitely talented, and a guy you can't really overlook too much, because if you do, I mean, the guy can finish the fight by submission that quick. So he's got definitely has some potential, but I just think stylistically, again, it's a bad matchup for him here because Kunamoto really doesn't have a significant advantage anywhere in this fight over Sarafian. So hard not to pick Sarafian in this spot, and I do think he's going to come through.
Kunamoto does have one advantage. He's 1 inch taller. Other than that, Sarafian is pretty much destroying him everywhere. It's not a good sign when, your UFC win was getting elbowed in the back of the head repeatedly until the ref called the fight for you. He wasn't looking that good in that fight anyway, and now he's fighting someone that's significantly better, a guy that was hyped up a ton following his appearance on The Ultimate Fighter Brazil, the initial season, and now Sarafian is actually dropping down to welterweight. The only concern I have for Sarafian here is how he handles the weight cut, because not only is he dropping down, he's fighting quite a ways away from Brazil. He's fighting all the way in Canada. So it's in a foreign country, and he's cutting down to welterweight for the first time. So that's my only thing that I'm really worried about, because on the feet, Sarafian should have an advantage here. He has some solid boxing. He has some serious power. He should be able to light Kunamoto up if they're in stand-up exchanges. And on the ground, Sarafian has some excellent judo, some solid wrestling, excellent top control, and he should have no problem dealing with Kunamoto's submission prowess. So if this fight goes to the canvas, I definitely see Sarafian being the one that initiates it, Sarafian being the one that gets on top, and he's just so much more physical that I can definitely see Sarafian just bullying his way to a submission. And if Kunamoto won't give up a submission, Sarafian will probably drop some ground and pound. Like, Kunamoto is a talented grappler, but I just think Sarafian's going to be too much for him here, and he's just going to get overwhelmed. So, there's really not much more to say. So my pick's going to be Daniel Sarafian.
Now, kicking off the UFC 174 main card, we have a light heavyweight contest between Ovince St. Preux, who is 15-5 overall, taking on Ryan Jimmo, who is 19-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
OSP minus 170, the comeback on Jimmo plus 130. That was my opening line. Line got crazy for a bit. I mean, it kept on getting some action early on Jimmo, and it flipped the line, actually, I believe. And right now, the line is back to OSP as a slight favorite. He's minus 145, the comeback plus 125. So very slight favorite for OSP in this fight. And I think that's about right. I mean, this is going to definitely be a solid test for OSP. I think he's got more of an upside to him. I mean, he continues to be a kind of a raw fighter that's been developing his skill set, but he's definitely got some good physical attributes. I mean, the guy's a southpaw, he's tall, he fights long. He's going to have a significant reach advantage over Jimmo, which is great. And I think on the feet, even though Jimmo has that karate type of style and he's pretty accurate and he hits like a truck, I mean, he definitely has some power. I think overall OSP can mix things up a little bit better and tends to be a little bit more active overall in his career than Jimmo does. But this is going to be a war, another back and forth type of fight that we could see here. Now, as far as the wrestling goes, That's going to be tough as well. I think that Jimmo kind of has underrated wrestling. I mean, if you look back, I know he's been put on his back a little bit in the UFC, but overall he's got pretty solid takedown defense. And he doesn't really look offensively to take the fight to the floor. I mean, he has in the UFC again a little bit more, but throughout his career, he's been more of a striker, so he prefers to just kind of keep the fight upright with his takedown defense and, strike with people as well. But I think OSP does look to take the fight to the floor, more often, than Jimmo does, and his wrestling continues to improve as well. He's been fairly successful, getting the takedowns, and he's got decent takedown defenses as well. So I think that OSP, it's kind of his fight to win or lose here, overall, because he's going to have the physical size advantage. I think he has a little bit more of an upside, and the improvement that you see in his game, I think, is a little bit more so than Jimmo.
And I agree. I think that OSP just has a little bit more well-roundedness to his game. Now, Jimmo is going to be dangerous on the feet. Obviously, he had one of the fastest knockouts in UFC history. He's coming off of a big knockout win, and he almost finished James Tahuna in his second UFC bout. So he's clearly showed that he's got that solid finishing potential. The problem here is I think OSP, if he doesn't want to, he won't stand and trade with Jimmo. St. Preux has a really underrated ground game, some pretty solid wrestling, despite not coming from a wrestling background. And Jimmo, I think some of his statistics are a little bit inflated, especially the takedown defense, because you look at the guys he's fought, Jimmy Manua, Anthony Perosh was a really quick fight, Igor Pekrajec, Sean O'Connell. None of those guys have really elite level takedowns or anything, so he was able to stuff some takedowns against those guys. And the one guy that really actually tried to take him down repeatedly was James Tahuna, a guy without much of a ground game at all. And Tahuna was able to successfully do it and keep him down and land some really big ground and pound. And I think that that's what OSP's game plan is going to be heading into this fight. Now, on the feet, Jimmo should have some advantages. He moves pretty well. He has that funky style with the karate background. He can land some kicks. He's got some big power in his punches. But don't count St. Preux out on the feet. He has some big power too. He's already scored at least one big UFC knockout. But to me, what this is going to come down to is the takedowns, the wrestling, and the well-roundedness of St. Preux's game. And I think that's going to come forward, and St. Preux will be putting Jimmo on his back at least a couple times in this fight. So my pick's going to be Ovince St. Preux. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I'm agreeing with you, Brian. I think Ovince St. Preux somehow, some way gets this done. I think he's just too big, too athletic. If he wants to get close, I know Jimmo is kind of famous for putting people up against the fence, but I don't think he can do that against a bigger, stronger guy like OSP. OSP, his stats are very impressive. I know on the tail of the tape, it makes it look like Jimmo is amazing, and his stats are certainly anomalously good. But he does have only about 40 minutes of fight time in the UFC. A few of those were kind of layups for him. And so I have to take that with a grain of salt. The two better competitors that he faced, Tahuna and Manua, he lost. And the three easier fighters that he faced, he got past and he looked great. So the stats may be a little bit misleading. We do know that he's got the karate background. He is a very precise striker, and his knockdown rate currently is through the roof. Part of that's because of that one punch knockout against Perosh. But he still looks good. It's just that OSP, his efficiency rating is better. He's better at delivering punishment and not getting hit, and more so than Jimmo. And so wherever this goes, I think OSP's got that 6-inch reach advantage. He's the southpaw. He's the younger fighter. He's going to use his size to stay out of trouble, and he can fight all over the place. And maybe he's not the most honed, technical guy out there. Certainly that's not the case. But he is big and strong, and he is well-rounded, and he can mix in a lot of wrestling. And so at close range, I think he's going to get the better of those rounds. Two heavy hitters, two very precise strikers, and yet at the same time, I don't think one of these guys is necessarily going to catch the other one cleanly enough to end it on their feet. So I think it's going to be more of an all-over type of battle. It could take 3 rounds, and I think in the end, it's OSP who grinds this out.
All right, thank you. Now, moving up to the heavyweight division, we have former champion Andrei Arlovsky returning to the UFC with a 21-10 and 1 no contest record, taking on Brendan Schaub, who is 11-3 overall. Now, Nick, Where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Really, it's another pick'em fight. I mean, Arlovski opened at minus 140, even money on Schaub, and right now it's flipped. The line actually is minus 150 for Schaub, and Arlovski is coming in at plus 130. Tough one, man. I mean, because really, the first thing you gotta think about with either one of these guys is, I mean, both of them have suspect chins. I mean, we've known that about Arlovski for a while, and it's obvious that, Schaub has a suspect chin as well. I mean, he's been clipped and knocked out, in the UFC as well. So that's one scary thing. I mean, the first guy here that, makes a mistake defensively could get put out. I mean, both of these guys have tremendous knockout power and ability on the feet to deliver. Arlovski's the better overall technical fighter. I think he's a better overall striker. But make no mistake, Schaub's boxing is definitely offensively. He's talented enough to land some damage on Arlovski. I mean, he's strong enough to put Arlovski's chin out as well. But what it comes down to, I think, is, the ground game. I know Schaub is going to be looking for takedowns. I mean, he's been, using his BJJ and his, grappling a little bit more effective. And he's kind of been more of a grappling-based fighter than a striker. That's what he's trying to do, I think. And that's probably going to be the most successful route against Arlovski, even though Arlovski's got really good BJJ in his own right. And I don't think Schaub is going to be able to sub Arlovski on the ground, but he might be able to get a takedown or two. Arlovski has pretty solid takedown defense overall, though he's not going to make it easy for him. But if Schaub gets a takedown or two, of course, I think that's what a lot of people are thinking, then he could steal this decision. It might be competitive. But overall, I mean, like I said again, I think Arlovski, it's actually his fight to win or lose. He is the better striker. If he keeps the fight upright, I think he should be able to outpoint Schaub or even put him out and finish him.
Yeah, and looking at this one, I'm going to go the other way. I think that Andrei Arlovski's resurgence is a little bit overstated. The main reason is just look at the guys he's fought. Ray Lopez, Travis Fulton, Devin Cole, Mike Hayes, Mike Kyle, Andreas Kreniotakis. None of those fights are, big time heavyweight victories for anybody in this day and age. Basically every time that he's fought somebody that's a UFC caliber opponent in his last, 4 or 5 years, he's pretty much got dominated. So I think that while, he does have a little bit of gas left in the tank and he's earned his chance to come back to the UFC with his recent performances, I think that people are overvaluing a little bit that he's actually back. And Brendan Schaub has actually put in the time, and he looks like a completely different fighter. When he first entered the UFC, Schaub was a striker. He was knocking guys out. He had big power. And while he still does have that power, he's fighting smarter now because he doesn't have a great chin. He took a lot of damage in football and everything, and he's been knocked out on almost all of his wins, or in all of his losses. So he's relying a little bit more on his wrestling and grappling. I mean, he showed signs of it in the Gonzaga fight, in the Krokop fight with some takedowns, but in his last 2 fights against LeVar Johnson and Matt Mitrione, he really was aggressively pursuing the takedown, and then against Mitrione, he actually locked into submission and scored a submission victory. So I think what's going to happen here is it's going to be a battle between 2 completely different game plans. Arlovski's going to want to keep it upright. He's going to want to keep it in the boxing range, maybe mid-distance. And Schaub wants to close the distance, get inside, drag Arlovski to the canvas, and either ride out a decision with his wrestling or pursue the submission. Now, I don't think the submission will be easy, but I do think that Schaub will be able to take this fight to the canvas and at least pull off a decision. The only thing that I'm concerned about is if he gets clipped on the way in. And obviously, if he gets hit, doesn't matter how old Arlovski is, how much damage Arlovski's taken throughout his career, he still has that power. So if Schaub gets hit, he's going to be in trouble. But I think that Schaub can take him down, and Schaub can get this decision. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with you guys on both fronts. First, these guys have a lot of power, but they also have been clipped plenty of times. They've suffered 7 knockdowns between them. On a punch-for-punch basis, Brendan Schaub's been dropped a little bit more quickly than Arlovski, and both of them have heavy hands. They both punch above their weight class in terms of knockdown rate. So they're a little bit sloppy in their metrics. Schaub has a more precise jab. Arlovski's better with his power hand. They come forward, they punch at a high rate. They're not very accurate, but they hit really hard when they do land. That said, the stats on Arlovski, first of all, are pretty old. So these are performance metrics from his UFC career, which ended in 2008, and then Strikeforce career, which ended in 2011. We have lots of data on that time, but I just feel like the MMA world was a different thing altogether back then. The level of competition was different. And so to say that Arlovsky's stats are okay in some ways, he shines in a couple areas, but he's also deficient in others. And that is in a different pool. It's a different pond altogether that he was swimming in at the time. Brendan Schaub comes in. He has been in against some heavy hitters, some sharks before. He's gone toe to toe with Crow Cop. And he has showed this evolved game. He moved from a striking centric camp at Trevor Whitman's Grudge Training Center in Colorado. He's now moved to Los Angeles. He's been more in a grappling centric training program with the Gracies and a whole bunch of other camps. He's been mixing it up a lot more, working on his ground game. He already had some wrestling capability. He was actually the first UFC fighter to put Mirko Cro Cop on his back, something he did several times in that fight before knocking him out. So I do think that his wrestling is going to be the difference here. So I think it could take longer than people expect. The idea that this could be fireworks, it's going to be over in 1.5 rounds or less, that's a big gamble. Anything could happen in this fight. I wouldn't want to play that bet. But I do think that Brendan Schaub has more ways to win this. He's younger. He's a little bit bigger. I think he should be a little bit more fit. He proved that he's capable of grinding out 3-rounders against, dangerous fighters like Gonzaga and LeVar Johnson. He showed off his new submission game against Matt Mitrione. I don't know if he's going to get a finish on Arlovsky that same way. But you're right, Brian. I think I'm leaning towards your camp here. I think somehow, some way, Brendan Schaub gets this done. And it may not be pretty. And if he gets into the fireworks shootout right off the bat with Arlovsky in the opening round, it is a coin flip because whoever lands that first shot, the other guy's falling down. And that's a tough bet to take. It's low confidence. It could go either way. So, I think Brendan is a smart enough fighter that he understands his risks. He has evolved his game recently and his game plan will represent that. And so I think that he is going to be the smarter guy in fight night and he should grind this out.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on and dropping back down to the light heavyweight division, we have Ryan Bader, who is 17-4, taking on Rafael Feijão Cavalcante, who is 12-4 with 1 no contest. So Nick, where'd you open this fight and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Bader minus 165, Cavalcante plus 125. That was a comeback. Bader right now is minus 145, plus 125 for Cavalcante. So the dog price hasn't really changed. Line just got a little bit tighter. And again, it's basically two-way action over at the sportsbooks early on. I mean, there's support on both these guys. Another pick 'em type of fight, man. I mean, and another similar type of fight is what we just talked about with Arlovsky and Schaub. Talk about chins. I mean, both these guys are chinny as heck. I mean, no doubt about that. Both of them have been knocked out and been rocked several times throughout their career. Both of them have a ton of power and both of them have offensively some very good, solid talent. I mean, Bader has the wrestling, as we all know. He's got that wrestling background, which is very solid. He can get the takedown. His grappling ability is very sound as well. And on the feet, I mean, again, offensively, he does show some promise. I mean, he's got good boxing, and he's able to deliver some serious punishment. I mean, he's got really good knockout power. On the other hand, you look over at Cavalcante, he's almost a similar type of fighter. He's got solid wrestling overall. He's got good takedown defense and he's got, knockout power to say the least in his hands as well. And he's got obviously a good, jiu-jitsu background to go along with it. I mean, he's got, even though Cavalcante hasn't really used it much, I mean, he's got some legit BJJ, make no mistake about that. But I think this fight probably does stay up on the feet more so than not. Both these guys have the takedown defense to, I think, neutralize the ground game out a little bit. And I think if it stays up on the feet, I mean, it's going to be a shootout. It's really anybody, who lands the first solid punch again. I mean, both these guys are defensively flawed. I think Cavalcante actually has a little bit more, defensive skills than Bader. Bader just makes so many mistakes on the feet that it wouldn't surprise me if Cavalcante caught Bader first. But if the fight gets out of round one, you got to swing your advantage over to Bader big time here, because Cavalcante, I mean, as we all know, he hasn't really been to a decision ever, and he continues to fade throughout his career. After the first round, he's a different fighter in round two, round three. Now he's shown some signs in his past of improvement with cardio, and he even looked better a little bit in his last fight, of course. But still, I mean, my mind tells me that you really can't trust Cavalcante overall. And if Bader does manage to survive the first round, I think he can definitely get the knockout in round two, or even possibly start landing some takedowns in round two or round three. So I think you have to kind of go on a limb a little bit and pick Bader here, because he's the more skilled fighter. He's a better fighter. He's only a couple years younger, but these guys are almost mirror images of each other in different ways. So I do believe that Bader is the better fighter, though. So hopefully he doesn't get clipped and put out early, because I think he's going to have, I guess, a little bit of a brighter future.
And I agree that Bader should be the favorite. Both of these guys have their strengths and weaknesses, and their weaknesses are actually pretty similar. The problem here is both guys don't have very good chins, and both guys have a lot of power. So, just like the Arlovsky-Schaub fight, if this stays standing, it could be anybody's game, although I do favor Cavalcante a little bit on the feet due to a little bit better experience and technical striking advantages on the feet, and he does train with some better strikers as well. But where this fight gets really interesting is if it gets past the first round, where I think Bader should have a significant cardio advantage, as Cavalcante has, in his UFC debut, he faded after 2 minutes into the first round. And on the ground, while Cavalcante does have a pretty good jiu-jitsu game, he scored he has a decent guillotine choke, and Bader has been caught in those a couple times in the past. I think Bader's offensive wrestling should make a huge impact here, as long as he doesn't get clipped caught coming in. And Bader's ground and pound should be rock solid. If he gets on top of Fejao, I think Fejao is going to be in some big, big trouble in terms of fighting off of his back. And that's what it's going to come down to: is can Cavalcante hit Bader with a knee, with a punch, with an elbow, with anything before Bader can get inside, drag him to the canvas, and start beating him up? Because I think that's really how this fight's going to play out. And I think that, and especially the longer it goes, the more that needle starts to side towards Ryan Bader's side. So I'm going to go Ryan Bader. I think he's got a couple more ways to win, but again, it's a risky pick just because of the chin. But my pick's Ryan Bader. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
You guys nailed it. I mean, the stats are very clear on this one. Both guys, very heavy hands. You're right. This is a lot like the prior matchup with Arlovsky and Schaub. Heavy hands, but also they've been knocked down. So when these guys stand and bang, you start to flip the coin because someone's falling down, but you're not sure who gets it first. I think Bader's cardio and his wrestling is definitely going to be the difference here. His efficiency rating is much, much higher. It's actually tied with Demetrius Johnson for the highest on the card, whereas Cavalcante is the only fighter with a negative efficiency rating. That is, on average, he generally gets outworked for every minute that he's in there. So I believe that combination of forces is a clear enough indicator for me to lean towards Bader, but obviously the risks are there. Cavalcante has 7 knockdowns. Basically, when he lands a punch to someone's head, there's basically a 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 chance that they are going to fall down. So Ryan Bader has the second worst chin rating on the card behind Schaub. So we've got some forces at work here that say if they stand and trade, it's anyone's game. But I don't think Bader's going to do that. He's been getting better and better at avoiding the shots. Remember, he went toe to toe with Teixeira. He looked great right up till he got clipped. Now I think he's going to be more conservative against Cavalcante. I don't think Cavalcante has the same accuracy that Teixeira has. He doesn't quite have the same hands. So I think Bader is a little bit safer to test the waters a bit there, but I don't want him to stay there very long. I think he takes us down. I think there's going to be a lot of ground and pound. And Cavalcante, you're right. I think he's probably going to be worn out after the first round. He can't take that kind of onslaught. So I think this is Bader's fight. So the lean is there, but obviously there's still those risk factors.
All right, now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a welterweight contest between Rory McDonald, who is 16-2 overall, taking on Tyron Woodley, who is 13-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, I open up McDonald minus 150, the comeback on Woodley plus 110. And since that time, obviously, if you look at the line, Woodley's minus 125, so the line flipped. I mean, some tremendous support coming in on Woodley, and it hasn't really been two-sided action. I mean, Woodley's been steady getting bet. Now, that being said, I think by fight time and fight day, we could see this fight drop to exactly pick, or we even could see McDonald actually turn into the slight favorite here. So it's going to be interesting because usually Rory Mack gets a tremendous amount of support from the betting public. I mean, we all know that. And that's kind of why, I mean, this is a pick 'em fight on paper with a very, very slight lean for me, for Rory McDonald. But I open it a little bit higher because, I mean, if you look at the lines, I mean, throughout the history of, McDonald's betting lines, I mean, he's been bet up in most cases and the public just loves this guy. So they kind of jumped off his bandwagon. I mean, he's had some very tough fights recently, and he's performed. I think he's performed okay. I mean, look at the level of competition. He had a very close fight with Robbie Lawler. He had a very competitive, interesting battle with Damian Maia, but he was able to get the W against Maia, and that was a harder fight, I think, than most people think. I mean, just stylistically, Damian Maia is just such a good grappling whiz that it was hard to fend off some takedowns and keeping it upright against a guy like Damian Maia. And again, the fight with Lawler, I mean, look at where Robbie Lawler is now. So you got to give McDonald credit. I mean, he was close, and there were different judges in that fight. He could have easily won that decision as well. That being said, Woodley's performed really, really good in his own right. I mean, he keeps on continuing to improve his overall game. He has that type of wrestling that I think most people think will bother McDonald. He should be able to get some takedowns here and there. He's got that crazy knockout power on the feet as well. He's developing that confidence. I mean, that skill set that he could pretty much handle the fight anywhere he goes. I mean, that's how good Woodley is getting. And mentally, I mean, I think he's getting a little bit better too. But my concern with Woodley, as always, is that cardio. I mean, and sometimes you really can't do much about that. He could train his butt off, but he always tends to fade again after the first round, heading into round 2, round 3. He's a little bit slower and he doesn't do as much. He tends to get a little bit inactive. And I think if he doesn't get rid of McDonald early on, I think Rory has a legit shot of stealing round 2 and round 3. I'm expecting Woodley to possibly take round 1 in this fight. But again, after he does slow down a little bit, I don't think he's going to have that kind of success, as most people are expecting in round 2 and round 3. So I think, it's going to be McDonald's actually, his fight to win or lose here. I think he's the better overall fighter. I mean, he's going to have the slight reach advantage. I think he's the better striker overall. He's more versed on the feet. I mean, he can mix things up a lot better than Woodley can. And I think his fight IQ is what's developing and getting decent as well. He's only 24 years old, so he's got that youth advantage going for him, and he continues to get better, get stronger. He's filling out physically. So there's a lot of good things about Rory right now. I know, like I said, a lot of people are kind of jumped off his bandwagon, I think, here. But I'm not. I'm kind of sold on McDonald in this fight, and I think that he's basically the better overall fighter.
And I actually agree with Rory on this one. I think that he's getting undervalued here because he hasn't had the greatest performances in his last 2 fights, while Woodley had a great performance in his last fight against Carlos Condit. And, you know, looking at it, it wasn't just a fluke victory for Woodley against Condit. You know, he was working well against him on the feet, and he got the takedowns on the ground, and Condit got hurt, but Woodley was winning that fight anyway. So, you know, you gotta give him a little bit of credit there. But I think this is a different type of matchup. Now, one thing that is a little scary is McDonald has been taken down a couple times in his last 2 fights, but I think it's a little different. I think Robbie Lawler was able to take him down in the 3rd after hurting him, and Rory was fading a little bit. And Damian Maia in his most recent fight had a different style of takedowns, you know, where he closes the distance, latches onto you, and it just knocks you off balance and trips you and does a little different things. Woodley's a little more explosive, a little more freestyle type of takedowns. And those are the type of takedowns that can be easily avoided as long as McDonald is keeping his distance, utilizing his jab, and working footwork. So I think it's going to be a completely different type of fight. And on the feet, McDonald should have a significant edge. He uses footwork well, he dances around the cage, sometimes a little too much, and his jab is excellent. While he doesn't pack a ton of power and he hasn't really been committing to, you know, big power strikes, I think that he does more than enough to win just about every stand-up exchange with every fighter he faces. And Woodley, he's a little more reliant on that big one shot where he can, you know, close the distance, explode forward, and hurt his opponent. And I think that's going to be a little more difficult against McDonald, as long as McDonald is using proper head movement and getting out of the way and keeping his distance. When you're further away And especially when you have a long reach like Rory does, it's much more difficult for a fighter like Woodley to get inside and land either that big shot with the punches or a big takedown attempt. So I think as long as Rory's able to keep this standing, then I think he'll be in good shape. And you gotta remember that Tyron Woodley, while he did look good in his last fight, he does have a history of conditioning problems. And the longer this fight goes, the more difficult it should be for him to pull off the takedowns. We've seen him time and time again. Remember his Paul Daly fight in the Strikeforce where, he was able to take Daly down for 2 straight rounds, and then he just got really tired and he wasn't able to get the takedown, and he almost got finished there. And I think he's going to have to really work for takedowns against Rory McDonald if he wants to win this fight, and that's going to be exhausting. So I'm leaning Rory McDonald on this one just because of the technical advantages. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, full disclosure, guys, I have worked with both these guys, so I won't be making a formal pick. But the analysis tends to agree with your assessment. Woodley is the harder hitter, but he usually has trouble pulling the trigger, something that he'll admit to. And the reason he looked so great in his last fight is because he was facing a guy, Carlos Condit, who likes to come forward. So Condit was really walking into a trap. And that is a fight I worked with Woodley on. And he was ready for it. He changed levels. He knew he could throw a hard counter overhand right. He could change the levels and go down and shoot for the takedown. And both were working. Rory McDonald is not going to be that same type of opponent, and that's why, while I was confident in Woodley versus Condit, I am not confident in this matchup that either guy has a huge advantage. I think you're right. I think the betting lines will be the closest in this fight on the entire card on fight night. It really is a highly competitive matchup. It could go either way. Now, statistically, McDonald does have certain advantages. He is the younger, longer fighter. He is a little bit more precise and more active with his striking, so he controls the cage a little bit better. But we have seen him get wobbled. We saw him even get dropped against Robbie Lawler, and Woodley hits very, very, very hard in that division. He has 6 career knockdowns already, and his punch-for-punch knockdown rate is extremely high. So that is a threat in and of itself. Is if Woodley times those counters properly, he could drop McDonald. I don't necessarily see McDonald with the same threat of power in this matchup. I see him threatening by controlling the cage, being very precise, hard to hit, hard to take down. He's just a well-rounded technical guy. And on the ground, even if Woodley does get that takedown, he's probably not going to be submitting McDonald. So the finish probably won't come on the ground. So I'm not going to make a pick here. I will say that this is a really interesting, compelling matchup. I do think one of these guys deserves a title shot, whoever gets through the other side. And the line is, it's appropriately set. It's extremely tight. I think from a statistical standpoint, McDonald is probably going to come out with a slight edge. If we were pumping this through the numbers machine, the predictive model might come out with a little edge for McDonald, but this is either guy's fight. I mean, anybody could win this. I'm very interested to see how this goes down.
All right, now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a flyweight title bout between champion Demetrius Johnson, who is 19-2-1 overall, taking on Ali Bagautinov, who is 13-2. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Johnson -425, Ali +305 on the comeback. And right now Johnson is sitting at -650, the comeback +475. It stayed steady for a little while, and then, of course, a little bit more love on DJ coming in at the sports books in general with parlays, with everything else. I think the line is, at 650, it's getting a little interesting. We're getting a little bit too high. Definitely got to lean Demetrius Johnson here because it's stylistically, it just should be a terrible matchup, for Ali here, because Johnson is just better everywhere. Ali does have that devastating knockout power, no doubt about it. He's a very good, smart counter puncher, and he hits very, very hard, no doubt about that. So he's got to almost land that knockout punch, that puncher's chance that he's got against Johnson. If not, basically just sit back and pick his shots and maybe counterpunch well enough to earn himself a very close, controversial type of decision. But other than that, Johnson has the speed. He's got the wrestling advantage, we all know. He's just got the pure ability, and he's fought the best in the division, the weight class, and he's looked great doing it as well. So it's a spot where Demetrius Johnson just continues to improve his overall game. pound for pound, he's one of the best fighters in the world right now for a reason. I mean, the guy's just so good everywhere the fight takes place, and he's developing a little bit more knockout power. He's going to have a little bit more confidence on the feet. He has to be careful though, because Ali definitely has that kind of, again, puncher's chance that you got to be cautious with. But I mean, it's hard to pick against DJ in this fight. It's hard to pick against DJ against any flyweight right now. I mean, on the run that he's been on. So I think you got to look at it as clear as day here. And Demetrius Johnson, more times than not, should definitely win this fight. So I've got to go with him. I mean, there's not much really to be said. Stylistically, it's just a hard fight for Ali here.
And I completely agree. I mean, Demetrius Johnson, he's a special fighter. I mean, this is a guy that's, getting close to the top of the pound for pound ranks, and for a reason. He is extremely quick, possibly, most likely, the fastest fighter in the entire UFC roster. He's very agile. He is extremely well-rounded. He can take you down. He has very good takedown timing, as evidenced in almost every single one of his title fights. He has extremely good movement and footwork on the feet. He has developing power. And as you saw in his last fight, when he completely crushed Joseph Benavidez, a guy that was expected to be his toughest test in a rematch. And, he passed that test with flying colors. And he's got a developing submission game, as evidenced by his 5th round armbar over John Moraga. So, the kid is just an exceptional talent. He's knocked down every single challenger that's come his way. Everybody that's crossed his path, he has just looked even better and better every time out. And he's still on the rise. Now, Bagautinov is a really good fighter. The guy has some solid counter-striking. He has some decent wrestling of his own, as evidenced by his last fight against John Lineker. He has some big power. He scored a really impressive finish in his UFC debut against Marcus Vinicius. But the problem here is I just think he's a little bit worse than Demetrius Johnson in every single area, except maybe pure punching power. And Johnson stepped in there against, scarier strikers like John Dodson, and while he got hurt, he, came through and had a big time win. So I think that it's going to be very difficult for Bagautinov to pull this off unless he lands a big crazy fluke counter, which is going to be really difficult because of the way that Johnson moves. I think this is absolutely Demetrius Johnson's fight to lose, and he could win in any method. But I can see him pulling off a stoppage, perhaps even a submission victory. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with you guys. I think this is definitely Johnson's fight. I think back just recently, we saw Renan Barão go down against TJ Dillashaw, and the betting lines started out about the same. And again, when there's a champ who's a heavy favorite, he gets thrown into parlays, and the line runs up to a crazy number. And this matchup does not look the same as Renan Barão versus Dillashaw. Dillashaw, we saw some flags there that there was an upset potentially in the making. This fight does not have those same flags. I think Johnson is consistently the better fighter. As you said, he's extremely well-rounded. He's hard to hit. He's hard to take down. He's good everywhere, and his efficiency rating shows that. This guy outworks people, and he's been doing it against the best people in the division. And before that, he was actually doing it in a weight class above before the flyweights were even around. I mean, this guy went 5 rounds with Dominic Cruz. So, Bagautinov, he's looked okay. He just hasn't looked great. His efficiency rating is not that compelling, which is even worse when we consider that the competition he's been against is not the same quality that Johnson has had. So, I do think that Johnson is a very justifiable favorite here. I am more confident in him than I was in Barão by a long shot. And the numbers do back that up. I just don't see the statistical threat on the challenger side of the stat line here, to think that there's going to be any other, titles changing hands.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 174. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets for the event will be out Friday evening around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so stay tuned for them if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter because that's where we'll post it first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything that has to do with our show if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.